In Elm Ridge, Arkansas, a one-road town tucked between endless cotton fields and tired pine trees, nothing ever really changed. The population hovered just above 3,000, and most folks could trace their roots back to the same family names chiseled into the gravestones behind the church. Sunday mornings were sacred not just because of faith, but because of rhythm. By 10:15 a.m., the entire town was packed into the red brick First Missionary Baptist Church. Same pews, same smiles, same sermon length. The choir loft overlooked the congregation like a watchtower, and among the familiar faces, Natalie Green stood out. Not just for her voice, but for the steadiness she brought. She wasn't flashy, just the type of woman who remembered birthdays, who volunteered at the food pantry, who never missed a Sunday. Everyone knew Natalie. She was the kind of woman mothers pointed to and said, "That's how you do right." On May 5, 2024, that rhythm shattered. It was a warm morning, the kind that hinted summer was coming early. Natalie arrived at 9:12 a.m., like she always did, parking her dusty blue Honda Civic in the side lot beneath the white oak tree. She waved to Mrs. Lyle, the choir director, and gave Mr. Dalton, the usher in suspenders, a small Tupperware of banana bread. Her last recorded text, sent at 9:21 a.m., read, "Already here. Save me a seat." She'd sent it to her best friend and fellow soprano, Shannon. At 9:45, the choir began their warm-up. At 10:03, the service started. The last time anyone could confidently say they saw Natalie was 10:52 a.m., singing, "How Great Thou Art," as the final hymn echoed through the sanctuary. Her voice rose above the others, clear, sweet, steady. A video of the service later confirmed it. After that, nothing. The service ended at 11:05. As people poured into the lobby for coffee and cake, Shannon noticed Natalie hadn't come out with the choir. Her coat was still hanging on the wall peg by the exit. Her choir folder, marked with her initials, was resting neatly on her seat. Thinking she might be in the restroom, Shannon checked the hallway. Empty. The kitchen, still quiet. A few other singers said maybe Natalie had gone to speak with the pastor. But Pastor Drew hadn't seen her either. At 11:23, her phone buzzed on the counter in the kitchen. Someone calling her. She never picked up, and when Shannon opened her friend's purse, which had been left under the pew, she found her car keys, lipstick, phone charger, and wallet. Everything exactly where Natalie had placed it before the service started. At 11:38 a.m., panic set in. By noon, nearly 24 people were searching the small church and its grounds. The sanctuary was rechecked. The bathrooms, the hall closets, the Sunday school wing. Nothing. At 12:15 p.m., one of the deacons called 911 to report what they described as a possible medical emergency or missing person. The dispatcher asked the obvious, "Are you sure she didn't leave?" But there was no exit recorded on the single security camera facing the front doors. Natalie had arrived. She had sung. She had smiled. And then somehow she was gone. Not a soul in that church had seen her leave. Not one person remembered seeing her after the final hymn. And yet, when the clock struck noon, Natalie Green had vanished without a trace. Natalie wasn't just another face in Elm Ridge. She was one of the town's constants. The kind of woman who didn't just show up at the church bake sale but helped organize it, who drove elderly neighbors to the doctor's office on weekdays, and who remembered every kid's name in her second-grade classroom. She taught phonics and finger painting Monday through Friday and transformed into the soprano anchor of the church choir every Sunday. Everyone had a story about her. How she helped shovel a neighbor's driveway after a rare Arkansas snowfall. How she once stayed behind during a storm to make sure no student was picked up late. How she visited the nursing home every second Saturday of the month without fail. In a town where most people kept to themselves, Natalie was everyone's thread. So when word spread that she'd gone missing, from inside the church itself, it wasn't just confusing. It was terrifying. By Sunday afternoon, the church had become a base of operations. The choir room turned into a command post. Sheriff Clay Miller arrived just after 2 p.m., shocked and visibly unnerved. "She never even made it to her car?" he kept asking. Deputies scoured the building again. this time with flashlights and dogs. Volunteers combed the surrounding property, behind the tool shed, in the woods lining the cemetery, even crawling under the crawl space beneath the church. The K-9 unit picked up Natalie's scent in the choir room, but it ended near the back hallway. Not at a door, not at a window, just stopped, as if she'd disappeared into thin air. By evening, the entire town was involved. Volunteers handed out flyers, local radio stations repeated her description on the hour, and the grocery store shut down early so staff could join the search. Her parents, Tom and Linda Green, arrived from Little Rock by 6 p.m. Her mother clutched a printed church bulletin the entire night, as if trying to convince herself it would somehow explain her daughter's disappearance. "This isn't like her," Linda kept whispering. "She wouldn't leave without telling me. She wouldn't just walk out." But what troubled investigators most wasn't where Natalie had gone. It was how no one had seen it happen. The church had 3 exits, all clearly visible and facing the front lot, the side lawn, and the playground in the back. None had security footage of Natalie leaving. Several elderly members sat near the front doors and swore she never passed by. The back hall was locked from the inside, and no windows were broken or disturbed. No footprints in the garden beds. No disturbance to the mulch around the exit doors. It was as if she'd been erased. Detectives began asking subtle but difficult questions. Could Natalie have run away? Could she have been involved in something secret? But those closest to her dismissed the idea instantly. "She wouldn't run," said Shannon, her friend of 14 years. "Not without saying goodbye. Not without packing a bag. Not without taking her phone." Natalie had no history of mental illness, no recent trauma, no suspicious behavior. She hadn't changed her passwords, hadn't drained her bank account. In every way, her life was calm and stable. In fact, she'd just been promoted to lead her grade level at school and had agreed to help direct the children's Christmas pageant, something she'd always dreamed of doing. Still, the lack of clues forced the community to consider the unthinkable. And slowly, fear took root in a place that had never known this kind of darkness. By the second day, local news stations had descended on Elm Ridge, broadcasting live from the front lawn of First Missionary Baptist Church. The story was just too strange. A woman vanishing from inside a house of worship during a service filled with nearly 100 people. The headlines called it the church disappearance. Reporters interviewed members of the congregation, but no one had new answers. Some avoided eye contact. Others repeated the same confused phrases. "I swear I saw her at the end. She was there 1 minute and gone the next. I didn't see her leave and I was standing by the door." With mounting pressure from both local officials and the media, Sheriff Miller brought in state investigators and a team of forensic techs. They began scanning the church room by room. Floors, walls, closets, even ceilings. The choir loft was dusted for prints, but all belonged to known members. The carpets were scanned for blood, bodily fluids, even fibers. Nothing. The building was old but structurally sound. There were no hidden panels, no trapdoors, no signs of forced entry or escape. And yet, something still didn't sit right. That afternoon, investigators interviewed the sound technician who operated the AV booth during Sunday service. He reported that the feed from the lone security camera near the entrance had cut out for approximately 19 seconds, right after the final hymn at 10:54 a.m. They checked the footage. Sure enough, the screen glitched, froze, and resumed with several parishioners already gathering their things. Natalie wasn't among them. More troubling? When police tried to pull the raw file, it was corrupted. Completely unreadable. The technician swore he didn't alter it. It had never happened before. That gap in the footage was never explained. They also reviewed the service audio. The choir was crisp and clear until the closing song. At exactly 10:52 a.m., during the final verse, Natalie's voice, normally the most consistent soprano, suddenly drops out. It wasn't a missed note. It was absence. In the second half of the hymn, her part was gone. A few seconds later, someone's mic picked up the faintest sound in the background. A door creaking, a whisper, a soft scuffle. The audio engineer described it as a shift in presence, like someone exhaled and disappeared. As these inconsistencies piled up, church leadership began to withdraw. The pastor stopped giving interviews. The deacons refused to release certain building access logs without legal pressure. Several members of the congregation stopped attending entirely, afraid or ashamed. No one could tell. Rumors swirled that Natalie had confided something to the pastor days before the service. Others whispered that an unfamiliar man had been spotted in the back pew 3 Sundays in a row, always wearing the same gray suit, always leaving before communion. Then came the anonymous letter, typed, mailed to the sheriff's office. No return address. If you want to find her, look beneath the pulpit. Not under. Beneath. Sheriff Miller returned to the church with a structural engineer and an evidence team. They removed the wooden risers, unscrewed floor panels, and broke through the thin concrete underlay. What they found was strange. A hollow space about 4 feet by 6 feet, directly beneath the center of the pulpit. Empty. Dusty. But clearly used at some point. No one knew it existed. Not even the pastor. Inside lay a torn piece of cloth. Light blue. Consistent with what Natalie had worn that Sunday. DNA confirmed it was hers. But the rest of her, her body, her footprints, her phone records, her voice, remained missing. The torn fabric found beneath the pulpit stunned everyone, but it didn't bring answers, only more questions. For days, Elm Ridge hovered in a state of frozen grief. Church attendance plummeted. The children Natalie taught were confused and frightened. Her classroom door stayed closed, still decorated with cutout hearts and a faded spring into learning sign. Her parents, staying with friends across town, waited for the phone to ring every hour. But it never did. Then, on day 5, something unexpected happened. At 7:14 p.m., a janitor named Ellis Harding was cleaning the choir room, a narrow space behind the sanctuary used for warm-ups and robe storage. He'd cleaned it hundreds of times. But that night, something felt different. It was cold, he later told police, but not from the AC. It felt hollow. When he opened the far cabinet to dust the baseboard, he noticed something tucked behind the stack of black choir folders. A folded piece of paper, wedged tightly behind a binder. The top read, "To the one who finds this, I was still here." The handwriting was unmistakably Natalie's. Investigators were called within the hour. The letter had no date, no full context. Just short, cryptic lines written in what appeared to be a rush. "I heard someone come in after the service. I thought maybe Shannon forgot something. I called out, but no one answered. I turned to go down the hallway and someone was there. Not someone I know. Just eyes. And silence. I felt like I couldn't scream. The lights flickered. I don't know where I am now." The note ended mid-sentence, the final line trailing off as if the pen had been snatched from her hand. Police confirmed the ink was fresh. Forensic analysis showed it had been placed there no more than 48 hours earlier, after the church had already been searched 3 separate times. There was no explanation for how the note could have gone unnoticed, unless someone had returned and hidden it after the fact. Public response was immediate. News anchors debated whether Natalie had been abducted and briefly held inside the church, or whether she had written the letter from somewhere else and it had been planted. Some speculated that the church itself was being used for something secret. A few even suggested supernatural causes. But Sheriff Miller wasn't ready to entertain rumors. He focused instead on the most chilling fact. Natalie's note implied she had still been inside the church after everyone thought she was gone. Then came another break. On day 6, Natalie's father received an anonymous message in his Facebook inbox. No name, no profile photo, just a video clip timestamped 3 days earlier. It showed the church at night, completely dark, except for a single light flickering in the choir room window. Then, at the very edge of the frame, a figure. Just a flash. Someone peering out the stained glass and stepping back into the dark. Forensic techs slowed the video frame by frame. The silhouette was slender. The head was bowed. The hair appeared to be long and brown. The outline looked like Natalie. The leaked video sparked a wave of unease across Elm Ridge. It wasn't just that someone had filmed the church in the dead of night. It was where they were standing. The clip had been recorded from the north side of the cemetery, behind a row of dogwoods that backed up against the older graves. Whoever took the video had stood silently in the dark, aiming their lens not at the front entrance, not at the steeple, but directly at the choir room window. The implication was terrifying. This person either knew Natalie was in that room or wanted someone to believe she had been. Either possibility unsettled the entire investigation. Sheriff Miller posted officers outside the church 24/7. A mobile crime scene unit was stationed near the education wing, and thermal imaging devices were brought in to sweep the grounds. No unusual heat signatures were found. Nothing moved at night except raccoons and wind. Still, a silent tension choked the town. People stopped letting their children walk alone. Neighborhood watch groups sprang up overnight, and each new day brought more theories, but fewer clues. It was on the 7th day, exactly 1 week after Natalie's disappearance, that something else happened. Around 10:03 a.m., the same time service had begun the previous Sunday. The church's smart lighting system triggered a motion sensor in the choir loft. This wasn't unusual in itself. Animals occasionally got inside. But when the officer stationed out front checked the interior, nothing was there. The motion alarm had been tripped from the same pew Natalie always sat in. A quiet panic swept through the room as deputies scanned every corner. There were no intruders, no signs of forced entry, no open windows, but the scent in the choir loft was unmistakable. Perfume, floral, subtle, specific. Shannon, Natalie's best friend, confirmed it immediately. That's hers. She always wore that on Sundays. The scent faded quickly, almost as if it had been left behind by memory alone. But the timing and location were too exact to ignore. The officers reopened the loft and tested the cushions, railings, and robes. One of Natalie's hairpins was found on the floor, though the area had been swept 4 times in the past week. None of it made sense. Then the whispers began. A few members of the congregation, mostly elderly, reported something odd in the past few nights. Not sounds exactly, but shifts, breezes in closed rooms, faint footsteps on wood floors after everyone had left. One woman claimed she'd returned to drop off baked goods Tuesday afternoon and heard the distinct sound of someone humming from the choir room. She said the voice was high and soft, like Natalie used to warm up before practice. But when she entered, no one was there. Another claimed that the hallway lights blinked 3 times when she passed the bulletin board, something they had never done before. The sheriff's department didn't publicly confirm these reports, but word leaked out. Soon, crowds began gathering at the edge of the church lawn at night, some in vigil, some in curiosity. A few teenagers live-streamed themselves daring each other to knock on the back door. Others left flowers by the choir room window. No one broke in, but the air had shifted. What began as a missing person case was becoming something else entirely. Natalie's parents issued a statement through the sheriff's office. We still believe our daughter is alive. We ask anyone with information to come forward. We don't care about the why. We just want her home. But as the hours ticked by, and the choir room remained empty, the town began asking a different question. What if she never left at all? As the 8th day dawned, there was a noticeable shift in tone. Not just from law enforcement, but from the townspeople themselves. The whispers, the sightings, the unexplained traces. They'd all begun to pull something deeply buried to the surface. Fear. Not fear of violence or even death, but of the unknown. Elm Ridge had always been a place where things made sense. You locked your doors at night. Sure. But you didn't worry about who might be hiding in the choir room. Until now. That morning, during a private midweek prayer service for Natalie, something happened that chilled even the most skeptical members of the congregation. It began quietly. A retired deacon, James Taylor, had offered to say a few words, as was custom in the community. Just before stepping up to the pulpit, he looked toward the back pews and froze. The church was dim, lit only by soft sconces and natural light from the stained glass. But he swore someone was seated in the far left corner. A man, sitting perfectly still. Startled, James turned to Shannon, seated 2 rows ahead. Did someone come in late? He whispered. She turned and looked. The pew was empty. But James wouldn't let it go. After the brief service, he asked the others, one by one, if anyone had seen the man. A few brushed it off. Stress, maybe, or reflections from the windows. But then another woman, Clarice Benton, a longtime choir member, spoke up. "I saw him too," she said quietly. 3 Sundays ago. He was sitting in the back during rehearsal. Just watching. Didn't sing. Didn't speak. I thought he was someone's guest. When investigators pulled up archived footage from previous services, they located what appeared to be a figure. A man in a gray suit. Seated alone in the back pew on 3 different occasions. The same pew. Same posture. Always arriving late. Always leaving just before the final prayer. No one had ever spoken to him. No one knew his name. His face was obscured, head bowed. But his presence was now impossible to ignore. He hadn't returned since the day Natalie vanished. But his last recorded attendance? The Sunday before she disappeared. Sheriff Miller issued a call to the public. "We're looking for information about a possible visitor to First Missionary Baptist Church. If you know someone who matches the following description, please contact our office." No questions asked. The town held its breath. No one came forward. But behind closed doors, theories flourished. Some believed he was a drifter. Others thought he may have been tied to a previous crime, though no records matched his vague description. But Shannon brought up something else. He always wore the same gray suit, like he didn't have another, like he wasn't from here at all. That line struck a chord. Natalie's mother, who'd spent hours scrolling through missing persons databases, said something that stuck with investigators. What if he wasn't trying to hide from us? What if he thought no one would ever notice him in a place like this? The idea that Natalie might have spoken to a stranger, someone just quiet enough to go unnoticed week after week, someone who waited, lingered heavily, and it changed the direction of the investigation. A local artist, working with the sheriff's office, created a composite sketch based on the few details witnesses could agree on. Average height, pale skin, receding hairline, gray suit with elbow wear, black shoes scuffed at the toe. Flyers were distributed across Arkansas. News stations picked up the image. Still, no one recognized him. And yet, every night since, that same pew remained conspicuously empty, as if the presence, real or not, had been marked by something far deeper than memory. By the 9th day, the air inside First Missionary Baptist Church no longer felt sacred. It felt haunted, not in a ghostly way, but in the quiet, human way that trauma leaves behind. The pews no longer echoed with hymns. The organ keys went untouched. People came to pray, yes, but it was with lowered eyes and whispered intentions. Something wasn't right in Elm Ridge, and everyone knew it. The town hadn't just lost Natalie. They had lost the peace that once made this place feel safe. That morning, Shannon returned to the choir loft alone. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were raw from crying, and her heart beat with the dread of someone still hoping against hope. She wanted to sit where Natalie had sat, to feel closer, somehow. When she reached the 3rd pew from the right, where Natalie always placed her hymnal on the shelf in front, she reached for the book that should have been hers. Except this time there was another book. It wasn't like the others. The cover was worn, darker. And inside, handwritten notes lined the margins. Natalie's handwriting. Shannon knew it instantly. Her distinctive looping GS. Her little stars next to her favorite verses. But there was something else. A folded piece of paper, stuck between Psalm 91 and Psalm 92. Shannon opened it slowly. It was a copy of a song, "Come Ye Disconsolate," a hymn the choir hadn't sung in years. Natalie had underlined a verse. "Earth has no sorrow that heaven cannot heal." Shannon wept. She clutched the book to her chest and called Sheriff Miller immediately. Investigators examined the hymnal carefully. It hadn't been cataloged with the others. There was no barcode, no church label. And according to inventory records, that copy hadn't been present during the service 9 days earlier. But there it was, in pristine position, as if someone had placed it there overnight. The dust pattern on the shelf confirmed it. Forensic teams dusted the book for prints. They found Natalie's, and someone else's, partial, unclear. Larger hands. Male. Sheriff Miller called in FBI support. With federal agents now involved, every inch of the church was re-examined with more advanced tools. Infrared cameras, subsurface scanners, cadaver dogs brought in from out of state. And still no sign of Natalie herself. Just her words, her scent, her prints, appearing in places she should never have been able to reach after disappearing. In the midst of that chaos, Natalie's father made a quiet request. "Can I sit in her spot?" he asked. Just once. The agents allowed it. He stepped into the choir loft, knelt where his daughter had stood, and whispered, "Come home." Then something strange happened. The church's old PA system, which hadn't been used since the early 2000s, crackled to life for 2 seconds. No words, just static. A burst. The system wasn't even connected to the current soundboard. The power was off. Technicians had no explanation. What started as a missing persons case had become a layered mystery. Evidence appearing after it should have vanished, recordings malfunctioning, figures seen but never found. The church was beginning to feel like a maze of echoes, each clue more confusing than the last. But Shannon believed, more than ever, that Natalie had left these signs. She wasn't just missing, she was communicating. On the 10th day since Natalie's disappearance, First Missionary Baptist Church remained under investigation, now with full involvement from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. But while agents reviewed timelines, digital forensics, and psychological profiles, the heart of the mystery remained disturbingly analog. Natalie had vanished inside a building filled with people, yet left behind no trace until days later, except those personal, eerie clues that suggested something deeper, something deliberately concealed. That's when a quiet crack in the case emerged, from someone close. Pastor Drew Wallace, Elm Ridge's spiritual leader for over 17 years, had largely withdrawn from public statements since Natalie vanished. He gave early interviews to the press and had cooperated with local authorities, but something about his behavior hadn't sat right with Shannon, and eventually with the FBI either. While conducting routine interviews, agents noted that Drew never once said Natalie's name. He referred to her only as the young woman or the teacher. He seemed nervous, guarded, not grieving. When questioned further about his relationship with Natalie, Pastor Drew insisted they were cordial but not close. Yet several members of the congregation contradicted that. Natalie had reportedly met with the pastor privately 3 times in the 2 weeks before she vanished. Once after choir rehearsal, once during weekday office hours, and once immediately after a Wednesday evening prayer group. Why hadn't he mentioned those meetings? With pressure mounting, the FBI obtained a warrant to access the pastor's private office, a room he'd kept locked since the investigation began, claiming it contained sensitive church records. What they found wasn't incriminating in a criminal sense, but it raised alarms nonetheless. Behind a locked drawer, agents discovered a series of handwritten notes, prayers, some dated years back. But one stood out. It was recent, dated 3 days before Natalie vanished. In Natalie's handwriting, "I feel watched in this church, not by God, by someone else. I don't think I'm safe here anymore." Below it, scribbled hastily in pen, was what appeared to be Pastor Drew's handwriting. "You're imagining things. You're letting fear in where faith should be." When confronted, the pastor initially denied knowing about the note. But eventually, under questioning, he admitted Natalie had come to him with concerns, twice. She said she had seen someone inside the church she didn't recognize. Not during service, but during her volunteer shifts preparing children's materials. She described the man as quiet, always in the shadows, never speaking. She feared he had access to the building. She thought she was being followed, Pastor Drew finally said, looking down. She asked me to install more cameras. I told her the Lord would protect her. That moment shattered any remaining illusions. Natalie had cried out for help, and it had gone unheeded. The church leadership was forced to step down temporarily. The state sent in additional resources. And for the first time since Natalie vanished, the word cover-up began surfacing. Not in whispers, but in headlines. Whether Pastor Drew had anything to do with her disappearance was still unclear. There was no evidence of direct harm, no motive. But the fact that he had withheld knowledge of Natalie's fear, a fear that had been written in her own hand, cast a long, dark shadow over the very institution where she had once found joy. And perhaps it suggested the worst, that Natalie had seen something inside those walls she was never meant to see. Artist Palette Prompt 8. The Pastor's Office Discovery. A shadowy, wood-paneled church office. A desk drawer is pulled open to reveal a small pile of handwritten papers. One page is in feminine script, reading, "I feel watched in this church." Another paper has a bold male signature at the bottom. On the desk, a dim lamp flickers. A worn Bible and a photo of the pastor with his congregation sit nearby, slightly askew. Mood. Uneasy revelation. Hidden truths in sacred space. Betrayal cloaked in silence. The 12th day of Natalie Green's disappearance began with rain, thin, steady, almost respectful, as if the weather itself understood what the town was going through. Elm Ridge was quieter than usual. Businesses had reduced hours. The elementary school remained closed. The church parking lot, once full of joyful noise, had turned into a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape and watched over by tired, rotating officers who now wore their concern like a second skin. But the FBI hadn't given up. After recovering the alarming note from Pastor Drew's office, forensic teams re-examined the church's architecture. They brought in ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs with heightened scent training. Though every corner of the church had already been searched multiple times, something had always felt off, like there was one piece of the building's history no one had fully understood. And finally, on day 12, that missing piece emerged. A retired contractor, Melvin Cord, who had helped rebuild the church's south wing in the late 90s, came forward. He mentioned something strange, a blueprint error they discovered during the renovation. "There's an old storage chamber under the stage," he told agents. "Not the pulpit area. I mean asterisk beneath the floorboards of the Sunday school room. It was supposed to be sealed up years ago." The room in question was now used for puppet shows and children's lessons. A place filled with laughter, toys, and colorful art. The idea that it hid a secret cavity chilled everyone. Agents moved quickly. With permission from church leadership, what remained of it, they pried up the floorboards in the room's far corner. Beneath the boards was a rusted latch. It groaned like something alive when opened. A ladder descended into a shallow, musty chamber lined with concrete and old timber. No one had been down there in years. The air was stale and humid, laced with something else, something wrong. What they found wasn't Natalie, but it was her necklace. The small silver pendant she wore every day, engraved with a music note and the words "Sing with Joy," was resting atop a folded choir robe. Nearby, a notebook, water-stained. Inside, pages torn out. Others scribbled on with lines like, "He comes when the lights go off. I tried to stay awake. I tried not to breathe. He's here. He's inside the church." The notebook appeared to belong to Natalie, but oddly, the paper stock was older, yellower. Some pages dated back decades. Multiple handwritings. Different inks. Some entries were signed only with initials. RL, MMC. This wasn't just a hidden space. It had been used before. The chamber contained rusted hinges on the wall, metal loops bolted to the concrete, suggesting someone at some point had been held down there. A place built in secret, concealed beneath a children's classroom, now uncovered in the search for a woman who vanished without leaving. The discovery confirmed what no one wanted to say out loud. Natalie had been taken, and whoever took her knew this church better than anyone else. Agents took samples, lifted fingerprints, and cataloged every inch of the chamber. But again, no Natalie, just her presence, lingering in objects, echoing in forgotten corners. Investigators believed she had been held there, possibly in the early hours of her disappearance, and then moved. But where? How had someone transported her without being seen? Had she escaped? Had she left those clues as a trail? Or had someone placed them to toy with everyone? The church was sealed indefinitely. No more services. No more prayer circles. First Missionary Baptist was now a monument of unanswered prayers and spiritual dread. And still, Natalie's voice, bright, full, unforgettable, remained silent. 2 weeks had passed since Natalie Green vanished inside First Missionary Baptist Church. And still, no body, no conclusive evidence, and no arrest. The discovery of the hidden chamber beneath the Sunday school room led to statewide headlines, but even with federal involvement, the case teetered between horror and helplessness. For a town that once measured time by seasons and choir rehearsals, Elm Ridge now measured days by what hadn't been found. Natalie's parents eventually moved into a hotel near the sheriff's department, unable to go back to Little Rock without her. Her father rarely spoke now, except in hushed requests to investigators. Her mother clutched a scarf Natalie once wore, refusing to believe the worst. "She's not gone," she said at a prayer vigil. "You don't disappear from inside your church without someone seeing something. Someone knows." And someone did. On the 15th day, an anonymous tip came in through the FBI's encrypted hotline. The voice on the recording was heavily distorted, likely modified through software. It said only one thing: check the woods behind the cemetery. Look for the rock with 3 slashes. Search teams were deployed immediately. They combed the treeline, dogs sweeping the dense brush. Near an outcropping where the cemetery fence gave way to raw woodland, a flat boulder stood. Deep into its surface were 3 diagonal marks, like claw slashes. Behind it, tangled in vines and leaves, they found something shocking: a narrow tunnel, man-made, reinforced with timber and lined with old bricks. It extended beneath the church property by nearly 60 feet. Inside they found bedding, food wrappers, a small first aid kit, scraps of newspaper, fingerprints, some matching Natalie, others still being analyzed. But again, no Natalie, only the latest place she had once been. The tunnel exit was beneath a maintenance shed, which had long been unused and locked from the outside. Whoever had built it, whoever had used it, knew every inch of the church, every blind spot, every escape route. And that's when the theory changed again. Natalie had likely been taken by someone with intimate knowledge of the building. Someone who had access not just to the floor plans, but to the behavior of every member inside. A janitor? A former pastor? A retired deacon? No one could say. The evidence was still under analysis, and the FBI hasn't released further updates. The person of interest, the man in the gray suit, was never found. But what lingers most are the signs Natalie may have left behind. The notes, the hymnal, the whisper of perfume, the choir robe placed just so. It was as if she'd tried to leave a message, even while hidden, like her voice had found a way to remain even when she couldn't. In a press statement, the sheriff said, "We no longer treat this as a disappearance. This is a crime, a premeditated one. And yet, in the town of Elm Ridge, hope remains. Because until Natalie Green is found, alive or otherwise, her community refuses to give up." Stethoscope to every teacher, pastor, caregiver, and community leader watching this: never ignore the small cries for help. A shift in tone, a whispered concern, a request for added safety. Natalie tried to speak. She did everything right. And still, she vanished from the very place that should have protected her. Let her story be a warning and a call to action. Candle to Natalie. If you're still out there, we're still listening. Loudspeaker, thanks for watching. If the story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to the Vanished Echo Stories. We bring you real cases, real voices, and the haunting truths that refuse to be forgotten. Woman Detective, subscribe for more true stories of disappearances and mystery.